got a score to settle with that son of a bitch.
Devil May Cry.
Oh man, there's a lot to discuss, but so little info on this game. Devil May Cry 5 finally got announced, and this game, I think that it's going to be one of those games where you initially see that trailer, you're going to feel mixed, or you're going to really dislike it, like myself, but then after watching it several times and getting more info and discussing with other people about it, then slowly and surely you change your mind about how you feel when it comes to Devil May Cry 5. So I don't even know where to begin when it comes to this video. Alright, let's get into the characters. We have this new character who's talking to, I'm assuming, Dante about how he's taken tough jobs in the past, but it's not to this extent when it comes to what's happening in Devil May Cry 5. I'm thinking that this is someone like Enzo or someone similar to Morrison from the Devil May Cry anime. The reason I think that this could be the case is because this character seems like he's talking to him as if there's some history, and given how long Dante has actually been doing this in the Devil May Cry series, it would only make sense, because Nero has only barely started when it comes to like Devil May Cry 4, compared to Dante, who's been doing it for several decades. I'm thinking there's also a possibility that these new characters, the character who I assume is either someone like Enzo or Morrison, as well as the other new character, Nico, are there to replace the divinity statues. Now, I personally really would miss the fact that divinity statues would be gone, and part of the reason why I think that this might be the case is because in the trailer, Nico says that to Nero that, hey, if you want this new arm, you gotta pay cash first. So, and I will talk about Nero's arm in a moment, but this would kind of remind me of something like Ninja Gaiden, where you have checkpoints where you visit Muramasa to get some upgrades, or you go to his shop. So I don't particularly mind, but at the same time I would miss those divinity statues if they weren't there. Things have changed with Nero. I think the best way that I could put this is that he looks like Dante if he were cool. And by that I mean he looks like a character with a punk-like design. And I don't particularly mind that, because I think Nero does need his own like unique style to himself. I mean, how you could look at the trailer and just the way that he jumps out of the van and starts shooting in slow motion. It's kind of like DMC with Dante's Pizza Dick intro scene, and I think Capcom did that intentionally just to give some shock value and give fans something to talk about. Even the van that Nero's in, it has a spray painted 5 on there, and also a spray painted phone number in there, so it gives you that impression initially that this is going to be a sequel to DMC, which thankfully it's not. This is a trailer I think you really have to watch more than once in order to get the full context of what's happening. However, I digress. The most interesting thing is that Nero now has a prosthetic arm, and the reason being is that basically his dad ripped it off. Virgil came in and was like, bitch, I told you not to fap, and he just ripped that shit off. But jokes aside, as to the real reason, well, your guess is as good as mine, but I have spoke with a few friends about it, and we were speculating and thinking about any possibilities, and the best conclusion is that Virgil really just wanted to reobtain Yamato. Now that said, we also think that ripping Nero's arm off has some sort of story significance, and that it's part of a necessary evil that will be explained within the story. But again, your guess is as good as ours. I think that the actual prosthetic arms that Nero's going to be getting are mostly utility based, not really style based like something Dante has, where Dante's mostly focused on styles, Nero's mostly going to be focused on his arm, right? So I think that's what they're going to go with the prosthetic arms. Because we do see in the trailer that it's being used in various ways. Like, you have the standard grapple moves from DMC4, you have like this electrical force push, and you also have rocket surfing, which is definitely a callback to Devil May Cry 3 with Dante first meeting up Lady. I think that when it comes to the actual arm itself, it's going to feel similar to Pandora's Box, which I will talk about Pandora's Box later, but I'm getting that sort of vibe where they wanted to go for more of a utility-based thing. Now, the last thing in regards to Nero is his gameplay. From what we can see, it looks very identical to his combat in 4, which is not a bad thing per se, but I do think fans would agree that he's gonna need more than just Red Queen, Blue Rose, and his Devil Bringer, which is now a Devil Breaker because of the prosthetic arm. I didn't dislike Nero as a character in Devil May Cry 4. I did think that one of the problems he has in 4 is the lack of new devil arms and firearms to work with. In 4, he was made with the intention of being this beginner-friendly character, and while I can still see him being that way in Devil May Cry 5, I do think it would be wise of Capcom to give the character more to work with, but just not as much as something like Dante with that level of complexity that Dante has from 4. Since I've already talked about this character briefly, let's talk about the new character Nico. I really do not like this character. I just don't like this character. I don't like the way that this character is designed. I don't like the way that this character talks. I'm just not seeing how this character feels like a Devil May Cry character. And while I've heard people say that they feel like they went with a DMC sort of take with Nero's design, I feel like this is more true with Nico. Because if you've ever seen the concept art for DMC Devil May Cry, Dante was supposed to smoke, Dante was supposed to have tattoos, and this character just kind of fits that sort of description of like, this feels like a DMC-like character. Now, I do feel like some of the enemy designs and even some of the environments were made to appeal to those that enjoyed DMC, and to some degree I can understand that, and I do think that there are some things you could take from DMC that would easily work in a new Devil May Cry game, and we've seen that executed in DMC 4 SE. However, I think when it comes to Nico, I might have to just see her more in order to get accustomed to this character, but as it currently stands, I just really dislike this character. Anyway, let's talk about the last 3 characters. Virgil's pretty much back, and they're giving him a mysterious vibe, similar to what they did with DMC 4 SE Virgil, where he's got this hooded cloak and he's just kind of walking around. Something to keep in mind though is that his skin looks very dusty, dry, and pale, like almost like corrupt Virgil. So I want to know if this is in fact corrupted Virgil, or if this is just something that they're doing new and different with him. Something else to point out as well is that he's not wearing a similar trench coat to Sparta. He's wearing the stuff that he was wearing in DMC 4 SE, which in the trailer, it just looks completely charred, almost like he was in some kind of fire or explosion. And if we go by what happens in Malay Island with the original Devil May Cry, then it's only reasonable to assume that Virgil was caught in the blast, which resulted in him looking this way. However, then the questions of how is Virgil back and why did it take him so long to return come up when you start to really delve into the lore as it's currently established. Now, something else that's intriguing is that if Virgil's the 3rd playable character, then there's something that kind of conflicts here. You have this new character who's labeled as the Mysterious V, which you would assume is indeed Virgil. But the only problem is that Virgil doesn't have black hair, nor does he have tattoos or markings on his skin. If he's corrupted Virgil, then you'd only see pale skin and bluish veins along with red eyes. There's been theories out there speculating that it is still Virgil, he's just reincarnated or has permanent marks despite being freed from Mundus's grasp. And while I was initially on board with those ideas, something that my friend Renegade Operative mentioned on Twitter is that this could be a new character that is angelic, given that the logo for the new game, Devil May Cry 5, has like these wings in the shape of a V. So I can kind of see that idea, but I would also like to expand on that idea. Something to point out and keep in mind is that Devil May Cry has always taken some inspiration from mythology. For example, Dante and Virgil are inspirations for Dante and Virgil, Virgil being spelled with an I, from the Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno. Devil May Cry is also no stranger to taking a character's role when it comes to being inspired by mythology and altering what they're about. A perfect example is Beowulf. In mythology, Beowulf is a character that's supposed to be heroic, a champion with strength and courage. But in Devil May Cry 3, Beowulf is just a demon looking to kill Sparta and any of his descendants. You might be wondering at what I'm trying to get at here, and well, to put it simply, I'm thinking that this new character who's only known as V at this current point might just be a new character that's inspired by mythology. I think the biggest source for the inspiration would be probably Roman mythology. If we were to take a few of the gods from said mythology that would fall in line the most with the story details that Capcom released over on Capcom Unity, well, then there would be two possibilities here. For Tumnus, the god of seasons, gardens, and fruit trees, or Verbius, the forest god. The reason why I think these two stand out the most is because Devil May Cry 5's story takes place in Redgrave City, and in the story there's a towering demon tree that just appears at the center of it. Since these two have something to do with plant life, I think that these are two likely possibilities for the new character. There's a few more possibilities here on the likelihood of who this new character could be. We have Vidiovis, the god of the underworld, Vitus, the god who separated the soul and the body after death, Virtuous, the god or goddess of military strength, and Vulcan, the god of forge, fire, and blacksmiths. All of these are very possible or likely candidates for who this new character could possibly be. Another thing to note is that both Rebellion and Red Queen have been redesigned, and while I have a completely different theory as to why Rebellion looks different, I could see the possibility of Nero having met V, who could be Vulcan, to get some various upgrades to Red Queen. I could speculate on this all day, so I'll just leave it here, but I'd love to see what some of you all think on who this new character could be. Keep in mind that, as mentioned before, they could have heavily altered the character to fit Devil May Cry's lore. This is where I'll be getting into Dante, the last character we see in the trailer. A lot of people were speculating that this is not only a game that takes place after 4, but also 2. Mostly because of the fact that Dante's design, he just looks very dirty and rugged, and the fact that he was riding on a motorcycle in the trailer. Although after watching the trailer several times and discussing with various people, I'm starting to believe that that isn't the case. For starters, let's talk about the bike that Dante's on. It's Pandora. It's Pandora in motorcycle form. It's a weapon that we've seen in Devil May Cry 4, and its description is that it has 666 forms, so I think that the very big likely case is that this is Pandora. And I think the dead giveaway is the gold handlebars and the red lights, because that's just very reminiscent of Pandora. So this might indicate that we might be seeing legacy weapons for Dante, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. Another thing is Rebellion. As mentioned before, Rebellion has been redesigned, and it's the first time since Devil May Cry 2 that it's had some form of change. When we look at something like Devil May Cry 2, it's just a very simplistic design, it's not very drastic, but then when we look at something like Devil May Cry 3 and Devil May Cry 4's Rebellion, it's very similar to that. It's closer to that. It kind of looks like they took both Devil May Cry 2 and Devil May Cry 3 and 4 Rebellion and just kind of meshed it together. And I think from a lore perspective, that's just supposed to indicate that Dante is getting more powerful, so like in Devil May Cry 3, when Virgil stabs Rebellion into Dante, the mouths on the skulls open up, the bones on the side of the rib cage for the crossguard, they also open up. So that's supposed to signify something, and I'm thinking that the redesign is also supposed to signify some sort of power change and power shift with Dante's current power level. I think it's just indicating that Dante is getting stronger. He's gotten stronger compared to what he was like in Devil May Cry 4. Then there's his new look, which to me it looks very reminiscent of what he was wearing in 4, and I think that should have been a very obvious sign that this is not something that's taking place after 2. It's not taking place after directly 2, in my opinion. And if that was the case, I think that Dante would just look very reminiscent of what he looked like in Devil May Cry 2. From a story perspective, I would assume that Dante has just gotten into the middle of whatever is taking place in Devil May Cry 5, and he just began to fight a very long time while Nero was doing whatever he was doing. That's my best guess. I think that, if anything, Nero and Virgil are going to kick off the beginning of the events of Devil May Cry 5, while Dante and V just kind of get themselves involved midway through. That's my personal opinion. I think that's just how it's going to happen, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. Another interesting thing that I kind of glossed over with Dante is that the city name is Redgrave City, and for those of you that might not know, Dante actually used to go by the pseudonym of Tony Redgrave, and it's been shown in the manga adaptations and also the Devil May Cry anime. That anime had a episode where Dante literally denied the fact that he was ever Tony, and I'm not sure if there was any significance in the game or if this was just an Easter egg, so this is another thing that we'll just have to wait and see. Other than that, there's really not much else I can say about the characters, so we'll have to wait on more info. Now, as far as the demon designs go, well, I'm kind of mixed on them for now. Some of them looked very reminiscent of DMC Devil May Cry. Some of them looked like very reminiscent of Devil May Cry 3. Some of them looked very new entirely, so I just need to wait and see how they're like. Another thing that I really liked actually though was the new environments. The environments just felt very reminiscent of Devil May Cry 4, and some of them actually kind of felt like DMC Devil May Cry, the look of them, but they look so much better, so that's a good thing actually. And then there's combat. The combat is very reminiscent of Devil May Cry 4, it looks almost identical. The only thing that I could hope for is that it's better than Devil May Cry 4, so we'll have to wait and see for like a hands-on demo or something like that. Now, I will say that it is kind of disappointing that we have to wait until Gamescom to get more info on this game, especially when Capcom's Resident Evil 2 remake has just been announced and it's already getting gameplay footage and other things of that nature. So I guess the only thing that I can say to close off this video is that I'll just be keeping up with the game as much as I can and try to do as many videos as I can. So in the meantime, please feel free to comment, rate, and if you aren't subscribed, please feel free to subscribe as well, and I will be seeing you all in the next one.